So, with regards to Dragon Ball music, there's a lot of composers out there for all the releases. But I mean, really, who's who in this wacky connect the dots of synthesizers and vibra-slaps? Well, you've got the big seven. Kikuchi, Yamamoto, Levy, Faulconer, Sumitomo, Tokunaga, Minza, and Johnson. Now, in no particular order, let's tackle who's who. Kikuchi is the original homeboy of the Dragon Ball music world. Scored Dragon Ball all the way to the end of Z, as well as the movies and such, all in one go. I mean, it's really hard to say much about Kikuchi because his history with the series is so uninterrupted and cohesive. He is generally regarded as the Dragon Ball composer, and is the background music for the vast majority of most countries' dubs. He favors horns, strings, and funky Eastern-sounding instruments, like his classic vibra-slap. Next up, you've got the one and only Yamamoto. Started out composing the music for like a million Dragon Ball games, but then boom, Dragon Ball Kai is announced, and wouldn't you know it, he is the composer. He composes music for Kai all the way through until he gets busted for being a little cheater. Then he was never seen from again. He favors lots of strings, especially the cello, and the occasional brass section, and some really cool guitar. Jumping back to Z, the year is the 1990s, and the country of America decides it's time to do DBZ, but instead with different music. Enter SHUKI Levy. This beautiful bearded man joins the fray, composing for the first 56 episodes of Z, before Funny decided to go all revolutionist and do everything in-house. Levy's tracks usually utilized long, sweeping synth sounds, as well as breakneck, fast-paced tracks that usually sound something like this. Moving on, beards are out and mustaches are in. It's time for the one and only all-time best argument starter, Bruce Faulconer. Faulconer Productions takes over creating a replacement score for Funimation on episode 57 of Z, composing all the way through to the end of Z. His tracks also make the occasional appearances in TV versions of some of the Z specials, but finding those is a hard task. Brucey and company favored synth sounds galore, using at least relatively verbose set of instruments, but again, usually on a synthesizer. They work heavy in leitmotif and were directed by Funimation to have music playing non-stop in every episode, to the bane of DBZ fans everywhere. Next up is Norihito Sumitomo, a relative newcomer to the Dragon Ball franchise. He jumped aboard the ship composing the music for the 2013 movie Battle of Gods, then went on to stay the primary composer for all things Dragon Ball, barring games, forever and ever. Kai the Final Chapters, Resurrection F, Dragon Ball Super, they're all backed by this saxophonist's wacky jams. He favors synthy saw sounds, a fair amount of strings, and a surprising amount of chorus. Jumping back in time, we've got Tokunaga, who was the original composer for the one and only Dragon Ball GT. GT was pretty much the only thing he composed for, Dragon Ball-wise, and he didn't really make much of an impact on the Dragon Ball community. As far as I'm concerned, he favored mixes for Dandan Kokoro Hikara Teku, the opening song for GT, and not much else. Speaking of GT, there's the infamous Mark Menza. When Funimation got around to dubbing GT, Faulconer had been gutted due to some legal hissy fights that had taken place, and hired Mark Menza, to whom I'm fairly sure listened to rap music once and was like, yeah, I can do that. He scored all of the English version of GT, as well as a fair few of the movies. I'm not going to tell you what he favors, because I know no one made it past this part of English GT.
Witness the ultimate battle between the greatest of warriors in all the worlds. Take the grand tour, grand tour. Time is running out. GT.
Last but not least, we have the English replacement composer Nathan Johnson. When it was time for Funimation to re-release DBZ, they'd already dropped Levy and couldn't use the previous audio for the first 2 arcs of Z. So, they hire a literal lawyer, who mentioned one time that he plays a keyboard. That's not a joke, to clarify. Despite his lackluster history, he went on to recompose the first 56 episodes of Z, as well as DBZ movies 12 and 13. He initially composed what appeared to be imitations of the Levy score. But by the time the movies came around, he had really grown into his own, producing very grandiose orchestral scores featuring lots of wind instruments. And that's pretty much it. That's Dragon Ball composers in a nutshell. There's some other crazy nuances hidden away, but only weirdos like musical collectors and Canadians care about those. So as a final word, I guess I'll leave you with this beautiful timeline graph that I made, and I will see you next time.